All right, welcome back to this week's edition of Wednesday Wisdom. I'm so excited because this is such an important topic that most people do not realize. What is the difference between the businesses that have thrived this year versus the ones that don't survive? And I'm sure you've noticed this crazy distinction between the many, many businesses that have a record years or record year this year and have grown tremendously despite all the changes and all the different things going on, all the challenges, both on the healthcare level of COVID and the political level with different political changes going on. And regarding all the different things that were at play this year, they had their best and record months, and it looks like year two, versus the ones that are barely surviving or the ones that disappeared. What made the difference between them? And I'll give you a hint. It does not have to do with which industry they were in. That might have a big impact, but that was not it, because in almost every industry, you had people whose businesses seemed at first like they were shut down or closed or totally destroyed. But yet those people, there were some people in that industry who still had a crazy successful year. So what did those business owners do? What did those businesses or companies do differently than the other ones who were in their industry that did not have successful years and are barely surviving or maybe even disappeared? What made the difference between the ones who excelled and the ones who were dismantled, who basically fell apart? And so in business, we often say, well, this had to do with the government, or it had to do with the circumstances, or it had to do with COVID. The truth is that every single one of those might have some truth, but they're all not the only truth. Meaning there are always factors that affect what's going on, right? If you're a landscaper and you live in a cold environment where it's blizzards every weekend, obviously that's going to affect your business. Unless you get smart and say, well, we're not just a landscaper, right? You expand, we'll talk about what that means, rather than thinking, well, there's no trees to cut, there's no bushes to trim, there's no grass to weed, because there's snow everywhere. You go, hold on a second. Let's ask a better question. So I want to give also an example, because I know people that gave me pushback when I shared this, which is great. I love pushback. What they said to me was that when you're an event planner, right? Event planners, what about them? They had events scheduled. They had all kinds of things laid out for the year. But what happened to them? Their businesses were basically frozen or shut down because of what happened. Travel Concierge, right? Travel's basically shut down in the last part of March, April, May, June. So what about them? Those are business owners. What happened to those businesses? How could you say that people in nearly every industry, people will just choose those two examples consistently, right? Or people who ran a gym or did personal training, right? Which I understand because that was my first business. Restaurants. So yes, in every industry, you have businesses that were affected drastically. I would say almost every business across every industry was affected in some way. But how it affected them and where they land today at the end of the year, at the end of, let's say, months of COVID and months of changes, makes a big difference. And I think that if you look at what made the difference, there's a lot of gold lessons you can learn to see if you are actually doing that, right? Are you doing the things that the successful ones did? Or are you possibly sabotaging your success without even realizing it? Are you possibly doing the things that actually sabotage the success of the other business owners? And I'll give you an example. So going back to the event planners who really had thriving years, and I personally have interacted and spoken to some of them, those event planners went virtual. It seems like the obvious option now, but guess what? When they were doing it in March and April and May and June, that's where they got the head start. That's where they got the market share, because they already had that momentum. They already had social proof that they had been successful running those things. They modified their service, and now some of them are doing better now than ever, because now they have bookings coming up for the next year or two, but they also have more clients because they were offering a service now for people who are putting on events, had to cancel those events, had to find a new event planner, and guess who they hired? They hired the person who pivoted their services, not just pivoted, but they came up with something better by asking the question. The question that they asked was, how can we expand what we're currently doing what we currently have, rather than what everyone else was doing, which was feeling like they had to cancel and constrict and close in. Because the expanding part, right? Asking yourself, if this was a rich market for my business, what would I be doing right now to expand it? That way of thinking got these business owners, got these companies into a place where they're saying, this is a rich economy. There's so much opportunity. I'm going to see a challenge. I'm going to see COVID. I'm going to say, this is an incredible opportunity. They might not say that at first. They might pick up their book and throw it against the wall. They might, need a good boxing session to get out some of that steam because they're really worried about their business shutting down. But at the end of the day, they asked a question that was different, and that led them down a new pathway that their competitors and other in their industry did not follow. That made a massive, massive difference. So another example, going back to the travel concierge, right? People who had travel planners, travel businesses. I know some of them who, when flights were canceled, hotels were basically shut down, you know what they did differently? They said, okay, well, if this was a rich market for my business, what would I be doing right now to expand my business? Notice that is the exact opposite of the thinking that business owners had during the COVID economy, right? They were noticing, other people were noticing everything constricting and everything closing in around them, not expanding. So when they asked the question of if this was a rich market for my business, what would I be doing right now to expand it? You know what the travel people did back in April, May, June? You know what they were doing? And I know this because I spoke to a few of them that actually did this, because they called me up and they said, hey, what should I do? They got into commercial and they started using their contacts to improve shipping and delivery and transportation of equipment and supplies. Because for a while, we weren't getting anything from China. For a while, we weren't getting anything from other countries in the US. And so they said, well, I work in travel. I connect people and planes, people and locations from A to B. At the core of my business, that's what they do. They kept thinking, those who kept thinking inside the box, I book travel for people who want to travel for business to conferences. That, of course, you're not going to survive in that economy. But if things were really good, they would have been able to ask this better question and find better and new and different services to make a difference. So there are three things, and I want to kind of just briefly touch on them. And maybe in the next edition of Wednesday Wisdom or one coming up, we'll talk about unpacking it more. But there are three practical takeaways that when you look at the businesses that were thriving during this time, that they did differently than other businesses that are barely surviving or maybe even disappeared. The three things are like this: marketing, mindset, and management. Now, every business needs to have mastery over all three of these. But what did they do specifically during the COVID economy, during COVID, so that after COVID, they would also have a thriving business? And even during COVID, they have a thriving business. What do they do differently? So first of all, marketing. The marketing mindset, the marketing mentality. I love this line, by the way. So I think what Warren Buffett actually said, that be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Notice that that is an expansive mindset. And if you're going to start a marketing, if you're going to start letting people know, hey, I work in fill in the blank, whatever industry, if you want to share below what your industry is, I'd love to know. I can give some practical examples. We can make this more interactive, which I love. But if you're in a industry that got shut down, we're using the example of the two most obvious, most impacted industries of travel and event planners. If you're in that industry, you know what you say? Be fearful when others are greedy, when others are shutting down and they're freezing their events and they're canceling their travel and they want refunds. Notice that that's the time to be greedy. I'm not saying to not give good customer service. What I'm saying is to be greedy and saying there's so much opportunity here because things are moving so fast in the opposite direction so quickly. There's so much energy moving in some direction, and it's not the direction that I would normally ask for in my business. But that must mean that there is such rich opportunity. And notice the two examples I just gave showed that there was a rich opportunity because now they're doing amazing. Now they actually expanded a whole new department in what they do, and they set themselves up for success during and after COVID. The second one is mindset. So mindset is actually looking at and saying, how can I look at this and see challenge as opportunity and get excited when I see challenge? Now, it sounds crazy, I know, right? It is crazy. So that's why you have to train yourself to reframe in your mind this terrible thing happened. My business got shut down. COVID's going on. The election, the government shut down my city. And you know what happens? When you notice all of that, you go down in a spiral and everything seems to just fall apart. And you don't let yourself see how you can expand. And instead of that, you have to stay on guard at your mind and learn to reframe challenge as opportunity, where you start to get excited and go, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Wow, this is great. How do you do that? Tune in a future edition. The third one, by the way, is management, managing your time, your people, and your processes. All three of those are massively critical. And so stay tuned for more on this on another Wednesday Wisdom. Let me know what your top takeaway was. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear if there's specific topics you'd love to cover or you'd love to see cover in Wednesday Wisdom. Leave your information in the comment below. I'll see you next week at Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern.